This is the generation of them that seek his face. This is the generation of them that seek his face.
Shabbat Shalom. We want to welcome each and every one of you here today to Torah Unleashed, our study of the Torah. And for those of you that are here, those of you that are coming in through our YouTube channel, we want to thank you. And I definitely want to make sure we thank those of you that are sending us some funds. We received some funds from one of you a couple of weeks ago, and I just want to thank you because we are a small little congregation here, and some of the finances that have come in from some of you that are in other states and other places, some of you that have been part of our congregation here and have continued blessing us financially. I want to specifically say thank you, and let me tell you, Adonai is going to use it for his glory. And so I just want to thank you. And I, of course, thank those of you that are here at Olive Tree Congregation, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And if you're ever passing through Albuquerque, and make sure you stop by on a Sabbath and join with us for our Torah Unleashed teaching. Today we are in Parsha number 6. So we're starting off again our Torah scroll, and we are in Parsha Toldot, which means generations. And we're going to be talking about this in a little while. It is Genesis 25:19 to 28:9. And so we want to thank each and every one of you. And it's mostly the story of Isaac, Yaakov, and Esav. And so this is a beginning story of especially Yaakov and his dealings with Esav. The readings for our Parsha Toldot, of course, Genesis 25:19 to 28. The Haftarah is Malachi or Malachi 1:1 to 2:7. And the Messianic scriptures are Hebrews 12:15 to 17. So make sure with every Torah portion, there's always a Haftarah, not half Torah, but Haftarah, which means addition. And then there's always a Messianic, either from one of the Gospels or one of the epistles. And so all these three combined kind of give us a synopsis of what we're doing. The subdivisions of Parashat Toldot, every parasha, each one of them have several divisions. Today's has 9 divisions. The birth of Esav and Yaakov. Esav gives up his, or sells his birthright. Isaac in Gerar, the wells between Gerar and Beersheba, the alliance with Abimelech, the Hittite wives of Esav. Yaakov attains Isaac's blessing by cunning. Isaac sends Yaakov to Laban, and another marriage for Esav. So this is what this parasha, in a nutshell, is today. Of course, like we always say, we can't hit every one of them. So what I do is I just hit several aspects to kind of see this parasha. And of course, at home, we read it, I read it and study it. So I would encourage that every one of you read it before Shabbat and start in your mind, start looking at some of the things that it says, start asking questions on some of those things. And then I kind of give you some things here on Shabbat. And then you go home and you study it again from that perspective. So you go to Shabbat in the Parsha, you hear the Parsha being taught here, and then you go home and you study it, And by Wednesday, you're already now starting for next Shabbat. And so the last part of the week, you are starting to look at the next parasha. We look at the parasha here, and then you study it again, and then you start again. So you go up, down, on a weekly basis. And like that, you get this parasha, the prophets, the Haftarah, and the Messianic scriptures throughout the week. Go with me to Genesis 25:19, which is our teaching for today. And it says there, this is the generations, ele toldot. These are the generations, or this is the genealogy. Sometimes it says this is the story, or this is the origins, this is the records of. The word toldot could mean any of these. And one of the things that we have here in the Greek, by the way, the Greek Septuagint uses the word Genesis. This is the origins of. It's translated as Genesis. Remember, as you study, and now this is something that, especially for those of you that want to go on to become a Torah teacher, one of the most important things in studying Torah is you study it from the Hebrew. You study it from the Hebrew. That's the original. That's Adonai gave it to us in the Hebrew. By the way, when he gave it to Moses in Hebrew and up to David's time and pretty much up to Ezra's time, the Hebrew and the characters were what we call Paleo-Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew in English. And it is the old original style of the characters that the Phoenicians, the Moabites, and of course the Hebrews used to write. When Israel went into captivity in Babylon, there they picked up what we call the Aramaic language. When they came back from Babylon, after the captivity was over, Ezra came back. And if you remember from Nehemiah chapter 8, Ezra reads from the Torah scrolls, and he's reading from the Hebrew. But then he has to translate to the people into Aramaic because many of the people had forgotten Hebrew in those 70 years, and the kids grew up with Aramaic, which was the language of Babylon at the time. And Ezra and Nehemiah and the Levites at the time, the priests and the Levites, had to translate the Hebrew into Aramaic. And at that time, the Hebrew characters, the Paleo-Hebrew characters, kind of went out, and the spoken Hebrew language was now used with Aramaic script. The Torah scrolls that we have are in Aramaic script. Right here where it says Toldot, that's Aramaic script. And of course, Aramaic script was not the original. The Paleo-Hebrew script was the original. And then it went to Aramaic script. And then 200 years before Yeshua, the Hebrew from either Aramaic script or from the Paleo-Hebrew was translated into Greek, into what's called the Septuagint. So I would encourage every one of you that is a student of Scripture, not only should you know Hebrew, but you also need to know the Greek. You need to learn to read the Greek Septuagint, because the Hebrew scrolls that we have now, these Hebrew scrolls do not look like the original Hebrew scrolls. In the Middle Ages, a group of people called the Masoretics looked at the Hebrew scrolls, and they rewrote them. So there's areas where these scrolls are a little bit different from the original Hebrew scrolls, and the Septuagint corrects those areas. So I would encourage you, like over here it says Genesis. Toldot is Genesis or the beginnings of. This is the generations of Isaac, the son of Abraham. And again, it reiterates in the same verse. It says again, Abraham became the father of Isaac. And remember, Isaac means what? Laughter. The boy named Laughter. And of course, if you all remember from our Torah teaching, that comes from Sarah laughing when Yahweh told her that she was going to have a child at 90 years old, and she giggled. So Isaac means to giggle, to laugh. And so that's what it means there. When we use the word Toldot, it's used in Genesis 1:5. Toldot, Ze Sefer Toldot Adam. This is the genealogy or the generations of Adam. Ele Toldot Noach, Genesis 6:9. This is the generations of Noach. Genesis 10:1. Ele Toldot Bnei Noach, Shem, Ham, Va, Yafet. These are the generations of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. 11:10. Ele Toldot Shem. This is the generations of Shem. 11:27. Ele Toldot Terah, the father of Avram, Terah. 25:19. Ele Toldot Isaac ben Abraham, where we're at today. And Numbers 3:1 has Ele Toldot Acharon u Meshe, and what this is the generations of Aaron. In the New Covenant scriptures, we have the Toldot of Yeshua. Matthew 1:1 says, this is the scroll of the Toldot, of the genealogy. Of course, the New Testament was written in Greek, and the Septuagint Greek of the Tanakh. And Matthew 1:1 says, this is the scroll of the genealogy, the Toldot of Yeshua the Messiah, son of David, son of Abraham. So a Toldot is a genealogy. It's a list of names. What's interesting about Yeshua's genealogy that most people point out is that when we usually talk about Abraham, we talk about Sarah, we talk about Rebecca, we talk about Leah, we talk about Rachel. We talk about these great women of the patriarchs, the wives of the patriarchs. But in the Toldot of Yeshua, we don't have any of the wives of the patriarchs. We don't have, that Abraham was married to Sarah. We don't have, Isaac married to Rivka or Leah or Rachel. We don't have any of those four women. What's interesting is in Yeshua's genealogy, we do have four women. But the four women that we have in the genealogy of Yeshua are, for example, Tamar. Remember Tamar in Jericho? The woman who is called a harlot? The woman that played a harlot with Judah. And then we have Rachav in Jericho, the woman that, again, was called a harlot. And then we have Ruth, a Moabite priestess. And then David begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Uriah. Bathsheba, her name isn't even mentioned. She's mentioned as the wife of Uriah, the woman that had been Uriah's wife. And so the four women that are mentioned in Yeshua's genealogy, a couple of them are, all of them are non-Jewish, Canaanitish, Hittites, and they're all from a false religion. They're all from outside. Tamar was a Canaanite. Rahab was a Canaanite. Ruth was a Moabitess. And Bathsheba was a Hittite. These are the grandmothers, the great-grandmothers of Yeshua. And it's interesting that Goyim, Gentiles, are in Yeshua's line. And the only women that are mentioned there are women that are not the matriarchs that we find in the Torah scrolls. We don't find our matriarchs here in Yeshua. We find matriarchs who are outsiders to many people. And that should teach us a lot, especially about Yeshua. You know, Yeshua, yes, he came for the lost sheep of Israel. But after that, he says, I have other sheep, meaning from the nations, from the Gentiles. Yeshua is the transition that Israel should have transitioned. Yeshua is the transition of Adonai giving the Torah and his ways to Abraham, to Moshe, to David, and they should have taken it to the world. But they kept it, but Yeshua now has become the vehicle of which everything that Adonai gave to Abraham, to Isaac, to Yaakov, to Moshe, to David, now Yeshua goes and takes it to the world. And that's why the Great Commission where Yeshua took 12 men and he discipled 12 men. And on the Great Commission, he sends 11 of these. One, if you remember, Judas left at this point, and he died. And what happened is Yeshua sends these 11 men to the world to make disciples of the world of what he had taught them. So everything from Torah to Yeshua is now the vehicle with these 11 men to go into the world and bring not only the gospel, which the gospel is the door, but to get them inside the house of Torah. Because we are saved, but our salvation is not just to be saved. Our salvation is not just for eternity. Our salvation is so that we could now be discipled and we could disciple others. And so this Toldot of Yeshua, as I was studying about the Toldot of Abraham as it's written there, I think is of vital importance. So please study that more. Now in 25:20 it says that Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. Isaac prayed to Yahweh on behalf of his wife, for she was barren. Yahweh heard his prayer, and his wife Rebekah, or Rivka in Hebrew, conceived. Now, when you read these two verses, he's 40 years old. Remember, she came, Rivka came on a camel. She came in, they had the wedding, they had the marriage there. He took her into his tent, and he was 40 years old. Now, especially in those days, as soon as you got married, the first thing that you want is children. And today, people wait. But in those days, children always would come right away. This was part of the reason for marriage, not just for love, although that was part of it, because it says Isaac loved Rivka, but it's for children. He's 40 years old, hasn't been married before, 40 years old. And what's the first thing he does? He prays. Isaac prayed to Yahweh on behalf of his wife, for she was barren. So from the time they got married, she, at, a year, 2 years, 3 years, hadn't conceived. This was unusual in those days. And he prayed to Yahweh. Now, when we have a need, when we have a problem, when we have a situation, what do? We pray. We pray. And it says he prayed for his wife, and Yahweh heard his prayer, and his wife, Rebekah, conceived. From this, just from this part, we get the idea that, maybe after a year, maybe 2 years, that now she conceives. But one of the things that we find in verse 26 is Isaac was 60 years old at the time of their birth. So if he gets married at 40 years old and he prays to Yahweh and she conceives, well, the pregnancy couldn't have been that long. So the other thing is that he prayed from 40 years old to 60 years old. For 20 years he prayed. In other words, that teaches us something. There's a lesson in that. And what's the lesson in that? See, today we live, and I'm sure he himself had a little bit of this. I know Abraham did. We all have a little bit of this. But especially today in Western culture, we have the idea of everything now. We want it now. We don't want it later. Who was the girl in Willy Wonka? What was her name? Baruka. I want it now. Remember that? We live in that drive-through, we want our hamburgers now. The drive-through is not fast enough anymore. They're tearing down all the McDonald's to build new McDonald's with better, faster drive-throughs. We want it now. We want everything now. In fact, one of the problems with prayer today is if Adonai does not answer your prayer in your time schedule, you give up. People give up. They stop praying, or they go to something else, or they give up on Elohim altogether because he didn't answer my prayer. I've been asking for this for a week, and he hasn't answered me. Well, here's a 20-year prayer. 20 years praying for a son. It wasn't just 1, 2, 3 years. It wasn't 5. It wasn't 10, 15. It was 20 years. He was 60 years old. Think of it. 40 years old, he gets married, wants a son. Has to wait till he's 60 years old. Ya viejo. Already an old man. Ready to retire. And then he has the children. But the children inside of her struggled. There was a struggle inside of her. And they struggled so much that she said, Rivka said, now remember, Rivka or Rebecca did not grow up in Abraham's home, in Abraham's culture. They were from Haran. They were still living many, not only miles from where Abraham and his believing, his faith culture was, but they were also involved in areas where there was a lot of paganism, in fact, if you remember with Rachel in a Parsha that's coming up, when she comes back to Canaan land with Yaakov, what does she have under her saddle? She has los diositos. little gods. So they were still into idolatry over there. So Rivka was not fully, from what we understand, not fully attached to Yahweh's way of doing things, to his chaderech, to his Torah, to the Torah that Adonai gave to Abraham. It was still a little bit off. And when they struggled, Rivka, in a time of despair, says, if this is the way it is, why go on living? Have you ever come to that point? Don't raise your hands. Many people come to that point, and many people actually get to the point that they actually give up, and then they stop living. They give up. They commit suicide or get involved in alcohol and drugs and things, immorality, things that get them away from the situations that they're in, which, by the way, produce even more complicated and worse situations. But if this is the way it is, if this is what pregnancy is, especially with these two, why go on living? She went to a point of despair, a place that many have been. Again, without raising hand, how many of you been in those times of despair? When it's almost that there's no hope, there's no open doors, all the doors are closed. Of course, we're going to find out that even Moses was in that place a couple of times. In fact, remember when the sea was over here and the army was over here and they were trapped? They were actually around going to freedom, but Adonai says, turn back and face the sea. So Adonai put him in a situation of despair. Adonai put him in a situation where the sea was over here and the army was here. What do we do? Well, the only place, as we're going to see, is to look up. So she went to consult Yahweh. It would be better to consult Yahweh first than to despair. But you know how our flesh is. No matter how much we know Yahweh, no matter how much we've been with Adonai, no matter how many times Adonai has answered prayer, how many times has Adonai answered prayer? And yet another situation comes up and why go on living? And then Adonai answers. Mightily, miracles occur. We've had miracles in our lives. But then another problem comes. Why go on living? No, she went to consult Yahweh. That's the answer. The answer is not despair. The answer is not hopelessness. The answer is not giving up. The answer is always go consult Yahweh. Go into your prayer closet. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. And 2 or 3 ask concerning anything, I will do it. Sometimes we have to get 1 or 2 to pray with us. Sometimes we bring prayers before the congregation. Sometimes we have laying out of hands, anointing with oil. But it's all directed towards Yahweh. It's all directed in the name of Yeshua. And Yahweh says to her, he speaks to her and says, 2 nations are in your womb. Yeah, these 2 brothers, these 2 twins, are actually 2 nations. Your issue will be 2 rival peoples. One nation will have the mastery of the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Now it's interesting that we have Abraham, and Adonai promised Abraham a son, but Sarah gave up. Sarah had a moment of weakness. Sarah had a moment of despair, and says, what do I do? We've been praying. Adonai hasn't answered. Oh, I have the answer. Not Adonai, but I have the answer. And so she cooked up this scheme to get Hagar and give her to Abraham, as we said last week, so Abraham could have a son through her. Oops. That wasn't Adonai's plan. That wasn't Adonai's will. That was the will of man. That was her will. That was her. And Abraham went along with it. He could have said no. He could have said, "That's not. I'm trusting that Adonai is going to give me." But he had a moment of weakness there too, and he gave up. And what happened? Ishmael was born. And Ishmael and Isaac became two rival peoples. And now, with Yaakov and Esau, what do we have? Two rival peoples. And we're going to see later, we saw with Lot and Lot's daughters, two other rival peoples. And there was other peoples of the land. So the sons of Ishmael, the sons of Esau, the sons of Ammon and Moab, the Arava people, the people of the Arava. The Arava means the wilderness, the desert people. Some call them today Bedouins, and some of their people, the Arab peoples. All these peoples now have intermarried, and all these peoples now together are rivals against Israel. And even what we see here today, what we see in the land of Israel today, is part of what is going on right here in these two verses. Two nations are in your womb, and they're going to be two rival peoples. One nation will be masters of the other. The elder shall serve the younger. Of course, Esau was the elder, and Yaakov was the younger. When in despair, what do? Give up? No. When in despair, we consult Yahweh. When in despair, we don't give up. When in despair, we consult Yahweh. And always remember that. Because despair is going to come into my life, into your life. There is no one that is going to be free of situations in life that we don't know what to do, that we can't grab a handle on. All somebody has to say is, you have cancer, or your son just died, or this or that. All of a sudden, what do? We give up. We despair. We start thinking of, what do I do now? How could I handle this? And some people just give up. That's not the answer. That will never be the answer. Whenever a situation occurs in our life, what are we going to do? Consult Yahweh. Put that in your mind. Imprint that in your mind. Consult Yahweh. Consult Yahweh in the name of Yeshua. Consult Yahweh. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And of course, like any happy mother, the two twins were a blessing. But as life would have it, and as Adonai spoke prophetically to Rebekah, by the way, when Adonai speaks to people, not everything he tells them from the beginning to the end is written in Scripture. Remember, Adonai spoke to Adam. Adonai would walk with Adam in the cool of the day. Adonai taught Adam so much. But not everything that Adonai taught Adam is written in Scripture. Why? How do we know this right away? Because the next chapter we have Cain and Abel. We have them sacrificing. You don't have the idea that you got to sacrifice this, you can't sacrifice that. This is the way you do it. This is not how you do it. Where did they learn that? Well, Adonai gave it to Adam, and Adam taught his boys. And they had probably been doing this for some time. But at this time, something occurred. There's a lot of stuff, like with Noah. Adonai tells Noah, get 2 of each unclean animal, and then the clean animals get 7 pairs. How did Noah know which was clean and unclean? Adonai had probably taught Adam, and all the way from Adam all the way to Noah. They knew which were the clean animals, which were the unclean animals, although they didn't eat animals until that time. But the 7 pairs were for sacrifice, which Adonai never has given us unclean animals for sacrifice. He's always given us only clean animals for sacrifice. And Noah sacrificed of the clean animals, but also to start up a food chain that we were to have. The first to be born was red. One of the main things about these 2 boys is, where did they get their names? The first to be born was red. He was more reddish. His hair was like a little hairy cloak. Sometimes I don't know how you were born or some of your kids or other, but there's kids that are born with a heavy set of hair. They're very hairy. Some kids are bald. My kids, and it was hard. It took them a long time even the girls, for their hair to grow. Some kids, their hair just grows. So every one of us, and here we have 2 twins. But these 2 twins, even though they were twins, these 2 twins were different. There was a difference they weren't identical twins. In fact, they were very unidentical. One was hairy, and his hair was reddish. And now I don't think, I've seen some of the pictures, and you see pictures of Esau, and this guy was a little baby with all kinds of hair. Like it wasn't that much. But it was red. His brother was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so they named him Yaakov. Yaakov from Akev means the heel, means a heel grabber, someone who grabs a heel. It's actually a derogatory term used also for he's a Yaakov, he's a heel grabber, he's a deceiver, which turned out to be true. Esau was born before Yaakov, who came out holding his brother's heel, as if trying to pull him back, trying to get in front of him, to be the firstborn. So the name Yaakov means he grabs the heel. Again, it's an idiom for deceptive behavior. But there's deception here. But what's interesting is that Adonai had spoken to Rebekah. Adonai had spoken about them and prophesied that the older was going to serve the younger. So again, even though Adonai had a plan to bring that about, Rebekah, we're going to see, like Sarah, and tries to manipulate the situation, tries to get in there and say, Adonai told me this, so how could I help Adonai out? Always remember, Adonai doesn't need our help. Adonai does not need our help. In fact, manipulation, by the way, manipulation is a Latin word, comes from the word manos. What are our manos? Our manos are our hands. The word mano means in Spanish, and Latin means hand. So to manipulate means to get your hands in the mix. We don't need to get our hands in the mix. Adonai is perfectly capable of doing everything without us. Remember, he didn't need us at creation. He did it himself. He doesn't need us in anything. All we have to do is be obedient, obey. Just obey what he says. We get in trouble when we don't obey. Every trouble is usually because disobedience. Even with our kids, young people, when you get in trouble, it's because you did not obey mom. You did not obey dad. If we would have obeyed our parents, we would probably be at a better place many times than we have been in our own history. The boys grew. Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field. He was a man's man. He was one of these guys that probably had all these trophy elk in his house, and he had his gun rack, his 30-30, his Winchesters, and all these guns there, and he always wore camo and all this type of guy. You know how these guys are today. But Yaakov was a plain man. He was a plain man. He dwelled in tents. Of course, we don't have any understanding of this. The rabbis do. In fact, they go on and on talking how he was always with his books studying Talmud. But Yaakov was a plain man. He always dwelt, he was probably not as big and bulky as Esau. He was probably a little maybe shorter, a little skinnier, maybe, he always wore glasses, Of course, Esau never wore glasses unless they were sunglasses. But Yaakov was this plain man. There wasn't anything about him that he was like an ordinary guy. He dwelt in tents. He was a mama's boy, whereas Esau was a daddy's boy. And that's where some of the problems come in. Because Yaakov loved venison. Yaakov loved to eat wild meats. Not only that they eat the sheep, the goats, but he loved venison. He loved this wild taste of meat. And Esau was the one that would go out and get the venison. He'd go out and get the wild. But Yaakov, he stayed at home. He stayed in the tent. He probably cooked, his own foods, his own little, maybe semi-vegetarian type guy. No one was a vegetarian back in those days, by the way. But he, from what we see here, he loved lentil soup. He loved lentils with red chili. And red or green? That is the question. New Mexico is the only state that has a state question. Red or green? And Yaakov made a stew, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Yaakov, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red stuff." See, I'm not lying. "For I am faint." Therefore his name was called Edom. Now, Esau was his name, and again, because he was red and hairy, they called him Esau. But now he takes on a name, Edom, which also means red. Edom is the color of blood. By the way, Adam means red man. Adam, man, red. Because Adam comes from the Adamah. The word Adamah is the Hebrew word for the red earth. So the Adamah is the red earth. And Adam is mankind who comes from the red earth. And over here, a play on that word is Edom. The country of Edom was the country of Esau. And because the red, in fact, you could still go today, those of you that have been to Petra or Mount Seir, Mount Or, today you see, just like here in Colorado, they have Red Rock State Park. In New Mexico, they have, here by Gallup, they have Red Rock State Park. So there's areas in our country where the dirt, the rocks, the mountains are red. And that's the way it is there by Petra, by Mount Seir today. And the rocks are red. And that's the land of Edom. That's the land of Esau. So they called him Red. His name was Red. I had a cousin who they called him Brown. I don't know why they called him Brown. But they called him Brown. But they called Esau, they called him Red. And here are the two boys. Here's Esau coming in with his wild game. And there is Yaakov making his red lentil soup. What did Jacob take when he took Esau's birthright? And as we read this, one thing that we need to know is that a birthright before this and after this, in Deuteronomy, it says it out, that you get the double portion. The firstborn gets the double portion. And so what Yaakov did is he said, okay, I'll sell it to you. I won't give you my red lentil soup. I'll sell it to you. And of course, what he sold it for was the birthright. Give me your birthright. Give me your double portion, and I will give you the stew, the soup. And of course, he bought it. He sold his birthright, and Yaakov bought it. He bought the birthright. It wasn't his, it was Esau's, but now he got it. In fact, what the Torah says right here, watch what it says. Then Jacob gave him bread and lentil soup, and after eating and drinking, he got up and went. This was all Esau cared for his birthright. So even though by cunning, Yaakov bought the birthright did not mean anything to Esau, which kind of gives us a little insight into his heart. Yeah, he was a man's man. Yeah, he was a hunter. Yeah, he had all these trophies and all these things. But he didn't care anything about the birthright, because remember, the birthright not only gave him the land, but what was the birthright about? The promise to Abraham. Remember the promise to Abraham? In you, Abraham, and in your seed, I will bless the world. All the nations of the world will be blessed by you and your seed. Meaning, at this point, Abraham, Isaac, and Esau, and Esau's children. The birthright could have come through Esau, not through Yaakov, but through Esav. But he threw it away, I believe, deep inside, we're going to see, is the yearning of the hearts of these people today who are descendants of Esav, descendants of Ishmael, descendants of Moab and Ammon and the Philistines and all these people. Deep inside, this was our land. And they sold it. They gave it away. And so now the birthright switched from Esav and his seed through Yaakov and his seed. Now remember, Adonai knew that already. I always remember, those whom he foreknew, he also predestined. Adonai in prophecy does not predestine people to anything. You know, there's people, Calvinists, that believe that these people are predestined for good and these people are predestined for bad, for salvation, for damnation. Adonai doesn't predestine anybody. He says those whom he foreknew, he predestined. So Adonai knew already what Esau was going to do. He knew already what Isaac was going to do, what Yaakov was going to do. He knew what Rivka was going to do. And Adonai worked it out. There was some cunning there. There was some deception there. But always remember, all things work out for the good for them that love Adonai, for them that are called according to his purposes. So even though, you know, Chasatan means things for evil, or people mean things for evil, the children of disobedience could do things evil for us. But always remember, don't worry about it. Consult Yahweh. Why? Because he'll tell you one thing. Adonai is going to take care of it. Adonai is going to deal with it, and deal with them, by the way. And he dealt with Esau for many years. We'll see more of that next week. There was a famine in the land, and Adonai tells Isaac to remain in the present. Don't go to Egypt. Remember what happened with Egypt, with Abraham. I shall be with you, and I will bless you. For I shall give all these countries, all these lands, plural, to you and your descendants, your seed, in fulfillment of the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I shall make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I shall give them all these countries, these lands, all the lands, plural, and all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your seed. By the way, here's one of the areas where the Masoretic text and the Septuagint, Greek Septuagint text differ. The word descendants here is not singular or plural. It is a company, just like deer. When you say deer, I went to hunt deer, or I caught a deer. You never say, I saw many deers. There's no such thing as deers in plural. It's, I saw many deer, singular. That's the way descendants is. But in the Septuagint, the word here for descendants and for seed, your descendants, your seed, is the word sperma. And the word sperma here is in the singular. And it's interesting that when Paul in Galatians says, remember, it is to your seed, and notice in passing, Paul says, that the Torah says to your seed singular, not plural. So really the Septuagint which does have singular and plural for seed, whereas the Hebrew, the same word is used for singular and plural, like the word deer. It is the Septuagint, the Samaritan text, Josephus, and others that actually correct the Masoretic text, which means that the original Hebrew that Moses gave us had it, meant it to be singular. And Paul says, which is Messiah, Yeshua. But this next verse is of vital importance. And Abraham was a Torah keeper. A lot of people say, well, wait a second, how could Abraham be a Torah keeper? The Torah wasn't given yet. The Torah wasn't given to us until Moses. Well, yeah, Moses wrote the Torah down. But from Adam to Moses, they followed Yahweh. They followed his will. And watch what it says here. In return for Abraham's obedience, for he kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my Torah. Look at that. So right here it says, Yaakov, Bekoli, Va'ishmor, and we get the word, the Vishamru, from shamar, to keep, to guard. For he kept my, and over here this word right here, mishmarti, for he kept my charge. And for he kept my charge, mitzvotai, and that's the commandments, mitzvot. He kept my commandments. Oh, wait a second. I thought the commandments were given to Moses. This is Abraham we're talking about. And he kept my, and this word here is hukotai. The word huk is hukim. It's the word for statutes. And watch the word here. Va toraitai. The word Torah. He kept my Torah. The word, this is my, this yod here at the end is Adonai saying, my charge, my commandments, my statutes, my Torah. Abraham was a Torah keeper before the Torah was given to Moses. That means that from the beginning, from Adam, through Seth, through Noah, through Shem, through Eber, all the way to Abraham, and Adonai spoke to Abraham. They were obedient to what? To the commands of Adonai. See, even before the Torah was given, there was good and bad, there was evil. People did evil things. Remember why was the flood? Because people did evil and bad things. And so here we have the idea that the Torah is not what people call the Old Testament. You know, the law of Moses. No. Adonai has been teaching us from the beginning. There's deep inside every human the idea of what is right and wrong. Every one of us has that. Even though we have never, even the people that have never read the Bible, the Torah, the people in the Amazon, they know what right and wrong is. They're sinners just like people that are religious, and they're just as much sinners. And they know what right, and they know what it is to murder. They know what it is to steal. They know what it is if one of their people murders or commits adultery or something like that, the rest of the little group will come in and take care of them rather ruthlessly. They know what right and wrong is, all the people, because there's deep inside of every human a conscience that was built to given to Adam, and from Adam to all people. So Abraham was a Torah keeper. The Abrahamic covenant was ratified with Isaac. From there he went up to Beersheba. Yahweh appeared to him that same night and said, I am the Elohim of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I shall bless you and multiply all your offspring for the sake of my servant Abraham. There he built an altar and invoked the name of Yahweh. There he pitched his tent, and there Isaac's servant sank a well. When you sink a well, sinking a well in those days was a sign of possession of the land. If you were a wonder, if you didn't possess land, you didn't sink wells. You just went from well to well. You went from spring to spring, from river to river. But once you sink a well and pitch your tent, in other words, he had property there. Adonai says, I'm going to give you this land. And in a sense, this was the deed, this sinking of a well was the title deed to that, as we're going to see later on. Yaakov attains the blessing by cunning. I wish we had time to go really into this. Obadiah 1:18, then the house of Yaakov will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. They will set it alight and burn it up, and no one from the house of Esau will survive. Yahweh has spoken. People from the Negev will occupy the mountain of Esau. People from the lowlands, the country of the Philistines, which is where Gaza is, the Shephelah, the lowlands, people from the Shephelah, the country of the Philistines, they will occupy Gaza. That's a prophetic word. They will occupy Ephraim and Samaria and Benjamin. This is what people call the West Bank today. And Gilead. The exiles of this army, the sons of Israel, will have the Canaanites' land as far as Zarephath, while the exiles from Jerusalem, now in Spain, will have the cities of the Negev. That's Sephardic Jews. Sepharad is Sephardic. Exiles from Jerusalem, now in Spain, now in Sepharad, it says, will have the cities of the Negev. Victorious, they will climb Mount Sion and rule over Mount Esau, and the sovereignty will be of Yahweh. And so the Esau or Edom is a goner. No more. And I believe in the last days, and part of what's going on now, is the IDF in Gaza is dealing still with these people. We need to prepare for Hanukkah 2023. Begins December 7th at sunset, ends December 15th at nightfall. And so we're going to be talking the next couple of weeks on Hanukkah. And believe that Adonai is going to teach us some things there. Please pray for the hostages. The word says, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Seek the peace of Jerusalem. And so on a daily basis, pray, wear your Israel hats, wear your Magen David, wear these so that, wear your tzitzit in public so that we could be a witness and stand. You know, Annabelle, you remember the movie of Corrie ten Boom? What was the name of that? The Hiding Place? Corrie ten Boom. And if you remember, Corrie ten Boom and her father, they were Christian Gentiles. And when the Nazis forced the Jews to wear the gold star, it's interesting that Corrie ten Boom's dad, and this is a true story, Corrie ten Boom's dad started wearing a star. And of course they said, "You're not a Jew. You know, why are you doing this?" And that was him standing up for the Jewish people as his. We need to stand up. Yeah, we might get attacked or whatever. But let me tell you, if we don't stand up for them, it's going to come here. Like what they say. Their idea is first we get the Saturday people, then we get the Sunday people. You see, they do not want just a two-state solution. That's just a stepping stone for a one-state solution without Israel. So pray for the hostages. Pray for Jerusalem. Let's stand. That little saying, wherever I stand with Israel. And so let's close in prayer. Father, even now we pray for these hostages that are under Hamas. And Father, I pray that you might fill them with hope, that you might, Father, that they would not go into despair, but this would be the time when they would consult Yahweh. Hostages in Gaza, consult Yahweh. Consult Yahweh. Come to Yeshua. Come to Yeshua. In the name of Yeshua, we ask, Father. And Father, I ask for all the innocent Palestinian people that are being also killed by Hamas, also being displaced, Father. And we do pray that you might allow, Father, your will to be done. And I pray that the Palestinian people also would come to Yeshua, would come to Yahweh, that they would consult the true Creator, true Elohim, Yahweh. Yahweh is his name. And Yeshua is his son. Father, do a mighty work through your Holy Spirit on them.
Shalom, shalom. Welcome to Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries. Thank you for joining us on our channel. If you have enjoyed this teaching and would like to see more, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so that you can be notified when we have new videos. If you would like to support Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries, please visit us at olivetreefellowship.com or TorahUnleashed.org. We thank you for your past support and hope to continue with you. Shalom, shalom. Have a good day. Shalom, shalom y bienvenidos a Olive Tree y a la Torah Desatada. Les doy gracias a ustedes y a Adonai por su apoyo que nos han dado aquí. Y si quieren continuar a hacer una donación, pueden ir aquí en TorahUnleashed.org o en olivetreefellowship.com y ahí pueden dar una donación. Su apoyo, su ayuda es importante en estos días. Shalom, shalom.